You swore on the moon that I was yours. I am a fool. Of all the scars I've earned in the mud of the training trenches, this public flaying of my dignity is the one that bleeds the most. My heart is a lead weight as I look at Sebastian, the man I thought was my anchor, now standing as my executioner. Tell me, Sebastian. A voice like grinding stones cuts through the silence of the court. King Dominic steps forward, his presence a suffocating weight. If I were to walk away right now and leave her to the wastelands, would you find your spine and claim her? Or is your pride the only thing you've ever truly cared for? I couldn't let them see me break. I am Maya Sterling, the wolfless anomaly of Silverthorne, and I was never supposed to be here. The prince had cast me aside, like a dull blade in front of the entire pack. Choosing the silken lies of Victoria Vance over the 10 years of loyalty I'd bled for him. What no one, not the council, not the sneering nobles, and certainly not Sebastian, expected was for the Alpha King himself to descend the dais and claim the girl they called broken. The rhythm of steel on steel usually drowned out the voices. Long before the blood moon ritual, the training grounds were my only sanctuary. I moved with a fluid, lethal grace, my dual blades whistling as they parried a strike meant to take my head. My sparring partner, a seasoned alpha guard, stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps of frustration. You fight like you're trying to kill the moon itself, Sterling, he spat, wiping sweat from his brow. I didn't give him the satisfaction of an answer. I lunged, more the silver of my blade reflecting the cold determination in my eyes. With a sharp twist, I disarmed him, the hilt of my sword slamming into his chest and sending him sprawling into the dirt. She has to fight that hard. A high melodic voice drifted from the balcony above. I looked up to see Victoria Vance, her hand draped possessively over Sebastian's arm. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were filled with a predatory glee. That is the tragedy of being born without a soul. Maya. No matter how many men you defeat, you will always be the girl who is fundamentally broken. The rhythmic clash of steel was the only prayer Maya Sterling knew. Long before the sun bled over the jagged peaks of Silverthorne, she was in the dirt, her lungs burning and her muscles screaming in a language of pure endurance. To the rest of the pack, the dawn was a time for the wolf to stir, for the primal shift to awaken the soul. But for Maya, the dawn was a reminder of the silence within her. She was a hollow vessel, a soldier born without the spirit of the beast, and so she had turned her body into a weapon of cold, calculated precision. Every strike she leveled against the training dummies was a rebellion. She moved with a lethal fluid grace that made the seasoned guards look clumsy, her dual blades carving arcs of silver through the mist. She had to be faster than their claws, sharper than their instincts. She had to be undeniable. But when the moon climbed high and the castle fell into a hushed, predatory stillness, the warrior's mask crumbled. In the hidden alcoves of the western battlements, where the scent of pine and stone hung thick, Maya wasn't a broken soldier. She was Sebastian's secret. Those nights were built on the intoxicating high of forbidden promises. Sebastian Thorne would find her in the shadows, his hands, warm and smelling of expensive sandalwood, tracing the calluses on her palms with a reverence that felt like worship. He was the Golden Prince, the Alpha's brother, and in the darkness, he swore she was his moon and stars. "They don't see you, Maya," he would whisper against the hollow of her throat, his voice a velvet drug. "They see a girl without a wolf, but I see the woman who will rule by my side. Let them have their traditions. When I am Alpha, I will change the laws for you." Maya lived for those crumbs of hope. She anchored her soul to the way he looked at her when no one was watching, the soft curve of his smile. The way he promised that the upcoming blood moon bonding would be the end of her shame. She allowed herself to dream of a crown, believing that his love was the shield she needed against the world's cruelty. She didn't see the way his eyes occasionally flickered toward the main hall, where the high-born ladies gathered. or how he never held her hand once the sun touched the horizon. She was blinded by the height of the pedestal he had built for her, never realizing that the higher he lifted her, the more devastating the fall would be when he finally let go. In those secret hours, she wasn't a soldier or a failure. She was a girl convinced she had finally found her home in the heart of a future king. The sky over Silverthorne bled a deep bruised crimson as the blood moon reached its zenith. The air in the great stone circle was thick with the scent of incense and the heavy electric charge of shifting energy. Hundreds of pack members stood in a silent predatory ring, their eyes glowing with the primal hunger of the night. In the center of the ancient ruins stood Maya, her dress a stark white against the dark earth, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was the moment she had survived for. She looked across the clearing at Sebastian, his golden hair catching the lunar light, and offered a small trembling smile. The elder Arthur stepped forward, his voice booming through the stillness. The moon calls to the spirit. Let those who would bind their souls step into the light. Maya took a breath, ready to move, but her feet stayed frozen as Sebastian didn't look at her. Instead, his gaze slid toward the noble seating where Victoria Vance sat like a porcelain doll, draped in midnight silk. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a low buzzing sound of confusion that quickly sharpened into mockery. Sebastian walked toward Tori, his stride confident and devoid of the warmth he had shared with Maya in the shadows of the battlements. He took Tori's hand, leading her into the center of the circle, right past Maya, as if she were nothing more than a ghost. I, Sebastian Thorne, claim Victoria Vance as my mate and the future Luna of my house, he declared, his voice ringing with a cold, political clarity. The silence that followed was more violent than a physical blow. Then, the laughter began. It started with a snicker from the front rows and swelled into a roar of derision that echoed off the Blackwood peaks. Did the Wolfless girl actually think a prince would claim a broken toy? A voice jeered. Maya stood paralyzed, the silver chains of tradition she had once viewed as symbols of belonging now feeling like a noose. She looked at Sebastian, pleading for a glance, a sign that this was a ruse, but he only leaned down to whisper something in Tori's ear that made her smirk. Tori turned her head, catching Maya's tear-filled eyes. "You served your purpose, Maya," Tori projected, her voice carrying over the crowd's jeers. "Every prince needs a distraction before he finds his queen. You should be grateful he let you play soldier in his bed for so long." Sebastian didn't defend her. He didn't even look guilty. He simply stood there, basking in the approval of the pack, leaving Maya alone in the center of the circle, and a humiliated anomaly exposed under the unforgiving light of the blood moon. The world tilted, the faces of the pack blurring into a sea of snarling teeth and mocking eyes, until the shadow of the throne room door creaked open and a presence far colder and more terrifying than the mockery began to descend the stairs. The roar of the crowd was a physical weight, a sea of bared teeth and mocking laughter that seemed ready to swallow Maya whole. She stood trembling in the center of the ritual circle, the white fabric of her dress feeling like a shroud, when suddenly the temperature in the courtyard plummeted. A silence, heavy and absolute, swept through the pack as the massive iron-bound doors of the high dais creaked open. King Dominic Thorne descended the stone steps, his presence so suffocatingly powerful that the air itself seemed to vibrate. He didn't move like a man, he moved like a storm, his dark cloak billowing behind him like a shadow cast by the blood moon. The laughter died in throats. Even the elder Arthur stepped back, his eyes wide with an ancient fear. Dominic ignored the nobles, ignored the council, and walked straight past his brother. He stopped inches from Maya, towering over her. Up close, his eyes weren't just gold. They were a molten, primal amber that looked into her soul and saw every scar she had ever hidden. He didn't look at a broken girl. He looked at a warrior. "Sebastian," Dominic's voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Maya's chest. He didn't turn his head. You spoke of distractions. You spoke of worth. Sebastian stepped forward, his face pale, but his expression still arrogant. Dominic, she is wolfless. She has no place in the lineage of... Silence, the king commanded, and the word hit like a physical blow. Dominic reached out, his large calloused hand gripping Maya's chin, forcing her to look up at him. If you are too weak to handle a blade of this temper, then you do not deserve to stand in its light. Before the gasps could finish traveling through the crowd, Dominic sliced his palm with a ceremonial dagger and pressed the bloodied hand to Maya's shoulder, the heat of his skin searing through her silk sleeve. By the blood of the first Alpha and the laws of the High Throne, I claim Maya Sterling as mine, not as a consort, not as a soldier, but as the Queen of Silverthorne. The shock that rippled through the clearing was deafening. Sebastian's jaw dropped, his poise shattering into a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Beside him, Victoria Vance let out a strangled shrill cry of rage, her face twisting into a hideous mask of jealousy. You cannot, she shrieked, forgetting her noble decorum. She is a defect, a freak. Dominic's eyes flashed with a lethal promise as he turned his gaze toward Tori, effectively silencing her with a single look. Without a word to the crowd, he wrapped a heavy fur-lined arm around Maya's trembling shoulders. She was in a daze, her mind spinning. One moment she was the pack's joke, and the next she was being swept toward the royal wing, a place no commoner had ever stepped. As the doors closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the ritual, Maya looked up at the king's stoic profile, wondering if she had been saved or simply claimed by a much more dangerous predator. The royal wing was a fortress of silence, a stark contrast to the howling mockery of the ritual grounds. The air here smelled of old parchment, expensive cedar, and the faint metallic tang of the king's own scent. Maya stood in the center of the sprawling chamber, her boots clicking softly on the polished obsidian floor. She felt like an intruder in a dream, her white ritual dress stained with the red earth of the circle and the literal blood of a king. Every shadow in the room seemed to watch her, waiting for the illusion to shatter. Dominic stood by the hearth, the firelight casting long flickering shadows across his rugged features. He had discarded his heavy ceremonial cloak, appearing even more imposing in his simple black tunic. He didn't speak for a long time, merely watching the flames until the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Maya gripped her hands together to hide their trembling, the phantom sensation of Sebastian's laughter still echoing in her ears. "Why?" she finally whispered, the word cracking the silence. "You didn't have to do that. You could have let me walk into the night, taking a wolfless queen. It will cost you everything with the council." Dominic turned then, his amber eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying intensity. He didn't move toward her, but the weight of his gaze anchored her to the spot. "You think I acted out of a misplaced sense of charity. You think I looked at you and saw a victim to be shielded." He took a slow, predatory step forward, his voice dropping into a low, resonant vibration. "So I have spent 5 years watching from the high balcony while the rest of this pack slept. I watched you on the training fields when the frost was still thick on the ground. I saw you take down guards twice your size, not with a wolf's strength, but with a mind that calculates faster than a heartbeat and a blade that never misses its mark." Maya blinked, the memory of her lonely morning sessions flashing through her mind. She had always felt watched, but she had assumed it was the eyes of those waiting for her to fail. "Pity is for the weak, Maya," Dominic continued, stopping just inches from her. The heat radiating from him was a physical force. "I didn't claim you because you were rejected. I claimed you because I am tired of being surrounded by wolves who rely on their instinct while their intellect rots. I claimed you because you are the only person in this kingdom who has fought for every ounce of power she possesses. I don't want a consort to grace my table. I want a weapon to stand at my side." He reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek with a touch that was surprisingly light, yet possess the permanence of iron. Tonight they laughed. Tomorrow we begin making them afraid. The transition from the barracks to the throne room felt like trading a heavy broadsword for a needle made of glass. Deadly, but infinitely more fragile. Elder Arthur sat across from Maya in the high-domed library, his face a map of deep-set wrinkles and centuries of pack lore. He didn't look at her with the overt disgust of the soldiers, but there was a clinical coldness in his eyes that made her skin crawl. Before them lay the great lineage, a massive tome bound in silver-dusted leather, detailing the bloodlines that had ruled Silverthorne since the first moon fell. In the dirt, Maya Sterling, you survived by parrying blows you could see, Arthur began, his voice dry like parchment rubbing together. But here, in the king's court, the deadliest strikes are the ones wrapped in a compliment. You are no longer a soldier. You are the sovereign's shield. If you fail to speak the language of the high houses, they will eat you alive before the first course is served. Maya looked down at her hands, still red and raw from the morning's secret sword practice. She felt out of place in the heavy velvet robes they had draped over her shoulders, the fabric feeling more like a cage than a garment. Arthur spent hours drilling her on the intricate web of alliances, the grudges held by the South Pack dukes, and the precise tilt of the head required to acknowledge a subordinate without granting them an opening. It was a dance of shadows, a silent war where a misplaced word could be as fatal as a slip of the foot in a duel. Victoria Vance will come for you today at the midday meal, Arthur warned, leaning back as he closed the heavy book with a thud that echoed through the silent room. She will use your lack of a wolf like a scalpel, searching for the softest part of your pride. If you snarl like a common brawler, you lose. If you weep, you lose. You must learn to use the truth as a weapon, not a shield. Maya took a slow, steadying breath, the same way she did before charging a fortified line. She realized then that Dominic hadn't just given her a crown, he had given her a new battlefield. The training was no longer about how many men she could floor, but how many spirits she could break with a single poised sentence. As she walked toward the dining hall, her heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her chin high. She was a soldier of Silverthorne, and if the king expected a weapon at his side, she would learn to make her tongue as sharp and as cold as the steel she had left behind in the armory. The traditional royal hunt was not a sport for the faint of heart, but for the wolves of Silverthorne. It was a visceral display of dominance. Maya rode at the king's flank, her dark leather brigandine a sharp contrast to the ornate silks of the court. The forest of the Blackwood Peaks was a labyrinth of ancient pines and treacherous ravines, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the restless energy of the pack. Victoria Vance rode several paces behind, her eyes like shards of ice, watching Maya's every move with a calculating, predatory stillness. As the hunt surged deep into the thicket, the pack began to shift, the sounds of snapping bone and fur erupting as wolves tore through the underbrush in pursuit of the great shadow stag. In the chaos of the transition, Tori maneuvered her mount close to Maya's. With a practiced, subtle flick of a hidden wrist bolt, she struck the flank of Maya's horse. The beast reared in agony, plunging toward a steep embankment. Maya threw herself from the saddle, rolling through the briars as her horse bolted into the darkness. But the sabotage wasn't meant for Maya alone. A low, guttural roar echoed through the clearing. From the shadows of the ravine, a trio of rogue feral shifters, monstrosities of the deep woods, leaped into the path. They had been baited, lured toward the royal scent by a trail of fresh blood Tori had secretly laid. One of the beasts lunged toward Dominic just as his own wolf was mid-shift, catching him in a moment of lethal vulnerability. The king's horse went down, pinning his leg beneath its weight as the largest rogue prepared to tear into his throat. The wolves of the court were scattered, lost in the bloodlust of the stag hunt. Only Maya remained. She didn't have a wolf to howl her rage, but she had the twin blades of a soldier who had spent a decade fighting for air. She moved like a blur of silver and shadow. And the first rogue, didn't even see her. She drove her blade through the base of its skull with the precision of a master surgeon. The second beast turned, snapping at her, but Maya danced beneath its reach, her movements a deadly choreography that the high-born wolves could never replicate. She sliced through its hamstrings and spun, driving her second blade into the chest of the monster looming over Dominic. The spray of hot metallic blood coated her face, but her eyes never flickered. By the time the rest of the pack arrived, the threat was dead. Maya stood over the pinned king, her blades dripping, her breathing steady and cold. She looked directly at Tori, who had appeared at the edge of the clearing with a mask of feigned horror. Maya didn't say a word. She simply raised her sword, pointing the blood-stained tip toward the noblewoman in a silent promise. Dominic, pulling himself from beneath his horse, looked at the fallen rogues and then at the wolfless woman who had saved his life. The debt of the crown had just been rewritten in blood. The fire in the king's private study had burned down to embers, casting the room in a soft amber glow that felt more intimate than any darkness Maya had ever known. Dominic stood by the window, his broad back to the room, watching the moon hang low over the Blackwood peaks. The silence between them was no longer the sharp, jagged thing of their first night. It had smoothed into something heavy and expectant. Maya sat at the low table, her fingers tracing the rim of a silver goblet, her mind still replaying the lethal dance in the woods. "You move with such stillness." "Ah, Dominic," she said softly, her voice barely a ripple in the quiet. "Even when you are at peace, you look like a man holding back a storm." Dominic turned, and for the first time, the iron mask he wore for the world seemed to crack. He walked toward her, but he didn't stop at the chair across from her. He knelt by her side, resting a heavy hand on the arm of her seat. "There is a reason the Alpha Kings of Silverthorne are known for their ice, Maya. It isn't a temperament, it is a cage." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the scars on her knuckles. "The Thorne lineage carries a shadow, a blood curse born from the first shift. The more we lean into our wolf, the more the beast consumes the man, until nothing is left but a mindless predator. To lead, we must remain frozen. To feel is to risk the madness." Maya felt a jolt of realization. And the stoicism wasn't arrogance, it was survival. "The curse is triggered by the shifting spirit of a mate," Dominic continued, his eyes searching hers with a vulnerability that stole her breath. "Two powerful wolves feeding each other's fire until the world burns. For generations, the kings have lived in cold, loveless unions to keep the beast asleep." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "When I saw you on that training field, I didn't just see a warrior, I saw a miracle. You have no wolf to feed the flame. You are the only soul in this kingdom who can touch me without waking the monster. You aren't broken, Maya. You are the only one who can keep me human." The weight of his confession crashed over her, washing away the last remnants of the girl who had begged for Sebastian's crumbs. She wasn't a defect. She was a sanctuary. Maya reached out, her fingers tangling in the dark hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him toward her. When their lips met, it wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of a secret affair. It was the slow, certain grounding of two souls who had finally found the only person in the world who could truly see them. In the quiet of the royal chambers, beneath the shadow of a crown and a curse, the soldier and her king found a peace that the rest of the world would never understand. The golden glow of the palace hallways felt colder than the barracks ever had as Sebastian Thorne stepped from the shadows of a marble pillar. Maya stopped, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of the ceremonial dagger at her waist, a gift from Dominic. The prince looked disheveled, at the arrogance that usually defined his posture replaced by a frantic, hollow-eyed desperation. He took a step toward her, his hands raised as if to ward off the distance she had placed between them. "Maya, wait," he pleaded, his voice a ghost of the velvet tone that had once been her world. "You have to listen to me. The bonding with Victoria. It was a mistake, a political necessity forced by the council. I never wanted her. I only did it to secure our future so that when I became Alpha, I could protect you. Maya looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal. She felt a profound, weary pity. You protect me, Sebastian? You stood in that circle and laughed while the pack tore my dignity to shreds. You chose a crown over a soul. And now you're upset that the crown doesn't fit. I was a coward, Sebastian snapped, his frustration boiling over as he reached for her arm. But he doesn't love you, Maya. Dominic is a machine. He claimed you to spite me, to humiliate me. He's using you as a pawn in his games with the council. Come away with me. We can leave Silverthorne. We can... Take your hands off my queen. The voice was low, vibrating with a lethal power that made the stone walls seem to tremble. Dominic stepped into the light, his eyes glowing with a primal molten amber that signaled the beast was perilously close to the surface. He didn't look like a king in that moment. He looked like an executioner. Sebastian spun around, his own wolf bristling beneath his skin. She was mine first, brother. You took her out of spite. Dominic moved with a speed that defied his massive frame, closing the distance before Sebastian could draw breath. He seized Sebastian by the throat, hoisting him inches off the ground. The air in the corridor turned electric, thick with the scent of ozone and predator. She was never yours, Dominic hissed, his voice a terrifying snarl, because you never saw her. You saw a secret to be kept in the dark, while I saw the sun. If you ever breathe her name again, if you even look toward her wing of the palace, I will forget you are my blood and treat you like the traitor you are. He dropped Sebastian, who slumped to the floor, gasping and clutching his neck. Dominic didn't spare him a second glance. He turned to Maya, his hand finding hers, warm, steady, and certain. In the silence that followed, Maya realized the prince hadn't lost her to the king. He had lost her the moment he decided she was something to be ashamed of. She turned her back on the prince's regret and walked toward the light of the throne room, finally anchored by a man who didn't need a secret to love her. The great hall of Silverthorne was a sea of velvet and silver, a chamber built for the roar of wolves, but now held in a suffocating, respectful silence. Maya stood at the threshold, her reflection in the polished obsidian floor, unrecognizable. She was no longer draped in the stained white silk of a rejected bride or the scarred leather of a common soldier. She wore a gown of midnight blue, structured like armor, with a mantle of white fur that trailed behind her like the crest of a winter storm. On her brow sat a circlet of iron and diamonds, a crown that did not grant her power, but merely acknowledged the steel she had always carried within. As she walked toward the high throne, the council of elders stood in a rigid line, their faces etched with the remnants of their skepticism. Elder Arthur watched her with a sharp, knowing nod, but others still gripped their staves as if waiting for her to stumble. Maya did not falter. She met the gaze of every high lord and lady, her eyes level, and her expression an unreadable mask of sovereign calm. She did not need to shift to prove her dominance. The way the air stilled around her spoke of a strength that didn't require a beast's howl. Dominic waited for her at the dais, his amber eyes glowing with a pride that burned hotter than the torches lining the walls. When she reached him, he did not offer his hand to lead her. He offered it as an equal. Together, they turned to face the kingdom. The council questioned the strength of a wolfless queen. Maya's voice rang out, clear and cold, carrying to the furthest corners of the hall. They whispered that a woman without a shift is a woman without a soul. But a wolf's strength is in the pack, and a queen's strength is in her conviction. I have bled for this land when I was nothing. Imagine what I will do for it now that I am everything. In the back of the hall, half hidden by a massive pillar, stood Sebastian. He looked small. The golden prince who had once been the center of her universe was now just a man in a crowded room, his face a map of devastating loss and hollow regret. Maya's gaze swept over him, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. She didn't feel the familiar throb of anger or the ghost of the love that had once nearly destroyed her. There was no heat, no vengeance, only a vast, chilling indifference. He was a stranger she had once known, a footnote in a story that had finally, truly begun. One by one, the council members bowed their heads, then the nobles. Finally, the entire hall sank to one knee in a wave of crashing fabric. Maya looked at Dominic, and in the quiet certainty of his smile, she realized the ritual was finally complete. She hadn't been fixed. She had been found. She was Maya Sterling, the sovereign of Silverthorne, and the world would never dare to call her broken again.